Welcome to Political Academy, Episode 2. So, this one is going to be a lot more organized than the last episode. The last episode was extremely unorganized, and looking back on it, I was really all over the place with different topics. It was mostly just a long-form rant. So, today's episode is going to be a lot more structured, with a lot less screw-ups, because there was some mess-ups with the audio. These episodes are mostly going to consist of typically one or maybe two topics. I'm still working on the structure of this show. I'm still working on the direction of which I want to take it in. So bear with me. Also, shout out to the 8 people that watched the last episode, and a special shout out to the guy that stayed for a total of 8 minutes. So in this episode, we're going to be talking about Bernie Sanders and the minimum wage. So this year, 21 states in the union are going to raise their minimum wage laws. Now, these states are varying in how much they are raising their minimum wage, and I'm well aware that these states have the right to change their wage and labor laws. In fact, if the minimum wage is going to be raised at all, I would rather individual states do it than having a federal government enforcing one standard wage. However, I do have an issue of raising the minimum wage beyond the current federal mandate of $7.25 an hour. Now, let's look at the facts. Bernie Sanders is probably one of the most well-known individuals advocating for a $15 minimum wage. Now, before we go further, I just want to issue a disclaimer. I like Bernie Sanders. I liked him now, and I liked him back in 2016. I think he's actually one of the most genuine candidates in the race. He doesn't really flip-flop on issues. He's really had the same set of values for as long as he's been in politics. I just think he's a really good guy, despite the fact that I disagree with him on several issues. Just because I disagree with him, it does not mean that I would be opposed to voting for him in the general election, even if he's not exactly the first person I would vote for in the primary. Now, the arguments that I'm going to be looking at for an increase in the minimum wage is going to be coming from feeltheburn.org. When I looked at Bernie Sanders for President 2020 page, I wasn't able to find anything about the minimum wage, actually. So I looked at a website called feeltheburn.org, which is basically a collection of all of Bernie Sanders' ideas and his proposals, and they have a page dedicated to the $15 minimum wage raise. So this is what feeltheburn.org says about the current minimum wage, and I quote, $7.25 is not enough money to pay the bills and support the family. Even when working full-time and year-round, 1 in 9 U.S. workers living in poverty. The effects of low wages can be viewed as a ripple effect throughout the economic and social spheres. As wages decrease, there is a consequential decrease in real purchasing power, and workers are inclined to take on more work in order to subsist. Nearly 40% of hourly paid workers are now working more than 40 hours a week. Now, I do not disagree with this statement. I'm not going to resort to the typical libertarian argument where, if people were just more frugal with their money, they wouldn't be impoverished. Frankly, that's just ignorant. One can simply not say that $7.25 is sufficient to support oneself, let alone a family. Poverty and inequality in this country is frankly insane. I saw this picture, it was in Seattle, actually. Oh, it might have been San Francisco, but it was one of those West Coast cities where there's really rich people and really poor. And it was a Ferrari in the middle of the street waiting for a homeless guy with a cart to cross the street. Hey Jamie, pull that up. I thought that picture really said a lot, because it really showed that in this country there's people with a lot of wealth and there's people in this country with no wealth. However, when it comes to economic inequality, I doubt that raising the minimum wage would alleviate the economic pressures that people in the lower class face. In my opinion, minimum wage jobs are supposed to be entry-level jobs. Raising it would just seem to make it harder for someone who just entered the workforce to get their foot in the door. And this raise would not equate to major corporations like Walmart paying the workforce more. What this means is that they could possibly fire half the workforce and either force the remaining employees to perform twice as hard at their job or implement more automation. I see a lot of people that don't take automation very seriously, and they just think someone like Andrew Yang is exaggerating. But we already have things like robot baristas being rolled out. There's testing a couple of cafes, and I believe it was China, where there was no one behind the counter. You just pay with a credit card. You select what you want on an iPad, and a robot arm makes the coffee for you and gives it to you. So I want you to ask yourself, do you think that your local coffee shop down the block, whether it be Joe's Coffee or Starbucks, do you think that they're really going to pay some guy $15 an hour to make probably mediocre coffee at a slow speed instead of purchasing a robot to perform that job faster and cheaper for him? Here is another argument taken from fieldofburn.org, and I quote, "There's an increased amount of evidence that shows that workers' pay hikes ultimately lead to stronger job growth. Additionally, this would not be the first time the country has increased the minimum wage or even doubled it, as Bernie has proposed. In 1949, President Truman led precisely the same charge, and the country saw unemployment decrease over the next several years to a 10-year low by 1953. Moreover, Bernie's home state of Vermont, along with other states that recently raised the minimum wage, seem to be doing just fine. In 2014, the states that raised their minimum wage experienced more job growth than states that didn't. Job losses mitigated on two fronts when raising the minimum wage. Number one, if you put money in the hands of low-income people, they spend it. Number two, increased wages means some minimum wage workers who are working 2 or 3 jobs to make ends meet can reduce hours, thereby opening up employment opportunities for those that have no job." Now, yes, it is true that historically pay hikes lead to stronger job growth, and it is true that Truman raised the minimum wage and unemployment decreased. However, this was in a world before mainstream automation. Factories were still open, and they were filled with employees working with machinery. There were no robots. Today is a much different story. Not only have all the factories left the country due to poor trade policies, but the jobs that remain, which are mostly in retail and food service, can be easily replaced by machines. And with the statement about Vermont, it is true to an extent, but wages in Vermont only went up by less than 1%. Employment growth went up by 1.8%, and unemployment went down by 1.2%. In comparison, the states that did not raise the minimum wage that year, wages only went down by 0.1%, employment growth was raised by 1.5%, and unemployment went down by 1.1%. So yes, while the economic changes that happened in Vermont that year were better than the states that did not raise the minimum wage, they were minuscule in the grand scheme of things. Now, with the statement, if you put money in the hands of low-income people, they spend it. Now, this is true for universal basic income as well, only without accelerated job loss. Now, for those that will comment that even though the effects in Vermont were minuscule, that doesn't mean that it created joblessness. This study was from 2014. Now, it may have not been that long ago, but a lot has changed. We live in a society where self-serve kiosks can be found everywhere from McDonald's to normal family restaurants. Amazon Go has 18 stores already. For those of you that don't live in major cities where they have Amazon Go, these stores have 0 cashiers. The only people that work at this store is basically a skeleton staff left to clean up and fix any technical issues that matter. Yes, there still is a staff, but there are no cashiers. It is only a matter of time before this becomes commonplace everywhere. And a reminder, 3.4 million Americans work as cashiers. That's a lot of people. And for the quote, increased wages means some minimum wage earners who are working 2 or 3 jobs to make ends meet can reduce hours, thereby opening up employment opportunities for those that have no job. Again, this can be achieved with universal basic income, only without accelerated job loss. Instead of raising the minimum wage, I feel as though the best way to alleviate the impoverished conditions that people live in is to implement a universal basic income but also provide greater access to higher education with an emphasis on vocational schools. UBI would be able to supplement the income that people already receive from low-paying jobs, and greater access to higher education and training increases the likelihood that an individual can lift themselves out of impoverished conditions. I am a firm believer in one being able to pull themselves up by their bootstrap. However, it is cruel to say this to someone with no bootstrap at all. Again, I like Bernie Sanders, but the ideas that he's proposing, like the minimum wage increase and the federal jobs guarantee, would have been more appropriate in the era of Franklin Delano Roosevelt's presidency and that of the New Deal. We live in a much different era than that which we lived in 70 years ago. I don't think that FDR could have predicted that machines would be able to perform basic tasks, such as that of cashiers in food service. And when you look at the countries in Scandinavia, of which Bernie wants to model our country after, none of them have a minimum wage. Now keep in mind, this is only true because in those group of countries, they have much stronger unions with a lot more power. Let's talk about the federal jobs guarantee. Now, would I be opposed to it? Not at all. However, to me, this just sounds like UBI with extra steps. This is what Bernie's website says about the federal jobs guarantee, and I quote, "As part of the Green New Deal, we need millions of workers to rebuild our crumbling infrastructure. Roads, bridges, drinking water systems, wastewater plants, rail, schools, affordable housing, and build our 100% sustainable energy system. This infrastructure is critical to a thriving green economy. At a time when our early childhood education system is totally inadequate, we need hundreds of thousands of workers to provide quality care to the young children of our country. As the nation ages, we will need many more workers to provide supportive services for seniors to help them age in their homes and communities, which is where they want to be." Now, instead of a federal jobs guarantee for all Americans, I would be in favor of a much more limited work relief program. A model that we should strive for would be that of the Civilian Conservation Corps. The CCC, as it was abbreviated, was a voluntary public work relief program for young men ranging from 17 to 28 years of age. This was a product of the New Deal, which operated from 1933 to 1942. The CCC performed work projects that typically involved, but not limited to, structural improvements including bridges, fire lookout towers, service buildings, transportation including truck trails, minor roads, foot trails, and airport landing fields, erosion control including dam checks, terracing and vegetable covering, flood control including irrigation, drainage, dams, ditching, channel work, and riprapping, forest culture including planting trees, shrubs, timber stand improvement, seed collection, nursery work, forest protection including fire prevention, fire pre-suppression, firefighting, insect and disease control, landscape and recreation including public camp and picnic ground development, lake and pond site clearing and development, wildlife including stream improvement, fish stocking, food and cover planting, and other miscellaneous things such as emergency work, surveys, and mosquito control. Now, instead of a federal jobs guarantee, I would be more in favor of reestablishing a type of new civilian conservation corps and expanding it to both young men and women, but also minorities, as they were largely excluded from the program, and the ones that were in the program received less benefits. Currently, the only way to serve our country is to sign up and join the army. Obviously, we should respect those that serve our country and protect us. However, I feel as though we need to expand the definition of what serving one's country can include. I feel as though Bernie's idea of giving every single American a job, regardless of age, is a bit naive. The jobs that he is proposing that they perform require individuals to be in good physical condition, that of which young people typically have. Another problem that I have with the federal jobs guarantee is that it does not specify the requirements for the jobs relating to early childhood education and supportive services for the elderly. Letting anyone walk in and become an early childhood educator disenfranchises those who attend higher education to become teachers, such as myself. We should also reserve supportive services for those that attend school to get a nursing degree involving elderly care. Alright, thank you for listening to episode 2 of Political Academy. I hope that this episode was a lot more structured and condensed and makes more sense. I'm working on improving the sound quality and my speech in general, because I don't know if you noticed, but I do say a lot, so I'm trying to eliminate that as best as possible. So bear with me. I hope I can improve the quality of this content. I'm not sure if I want to do long form podcasts or maybe a podcast with slideshows. I'm not quite sure the direction I want to take this in, so bear with me, please. Alright, have a good one.